Good afternoon, everyone. We'll let people file in for a brief minute. All right. Good afternoon. It's December 19th. My name is Elias Thomas. I am the hearings manager at the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, and this is the preliminary stakeholder meeting for the 2025 High Priority Habitat Map Rulemaking. Today, I'll go ahead and introduce Brian McGee, who is the CPW Energy Liaison for the Southwest region, and he's going to go ahead and take over, kick off the presentation on the maps, and then I will finish up with some information on the scheduling for the rulemaking, and we can take some questions after that. So with that, thank you, Brian. Go right ahead.
All right, thanks, Elias. Let me pull up this presentation really quick and let me know if you guys can see this. Do you
We can
see a
see it.
mule deer?
We do.
Okay. Um, well, thanks again, and thanks to the ECMC for hosting the stakeholder meeting, and thanks everybody for taking some time today to come and listen and discuss about CPW's high priority habitat map updates. Like Elias said, my name is Brian McGee. I'm the Southwest Region Energy Liaison based out of Durango. I've been working for CPW and working with ECMC for about 16 years now. I'm working on oil and gas permitting through the state. Before we get going into the presentation, I just wanted to recognize all the hard work from ECMC staff to get us here where we are today. In particular, I wanted to thank David Gates and Bob Sacco. David is with the GIS lead for ECMC, and Bob is our GIS lead at CPW. So really, they've done the yeoman's work to get us prepared to discuss HPH maps today. So thanks again, guys. The intent today is to cover CPW's process for determining updates to the maps and to provide a brief overview of the proposed updates to the HPH maps and direct all the stakeholders to resources that can help you explore the proposed changes. And then in addition, we'll hear from ECMC on a proposed rulemaking timeline. Did the slide advance? Okay. Every year we get a lot of questions related to how we develop our maps and what methodology we use and how we use our maps. And so I wanted to, before we jump into the high priority habitat specific stuff, I just wanted to take a step back and just remind everybody and all the stakeholders of CPW's species activity maps and that methodology and how that translates into the high priority habitat maps that ECMC uh, undertakes rulemaking to adopt. So CPW's SAM maps are available publicly, and they reflect a broad range of habitats and information on species distributions in the state of Colorado. We use this for our wildlife management purposes, including CPW land use commenting. The feds use it in federal land management planning. Academia uses it, industry uses it, develop uses these maps, NGOs, land trusts, counties, consultants, in all sectors. They use them for a variety of purposes in land use planning, permitting, land management, species conservation planning. The use of our maps by ECMC is why we're here today, and ECMC is elected to adopt a subset of species activity maps known as high priority habitat maps into their SB 181 regs. So that's just one example of how these maps are used. The SAM map database is comprised of approximately 175 data layers mapped by CPW and then publicly available through various portals. Our SAM mapping process has been in place for nearly 30 years. And while the technology has improved our ability to synthesize the data, the general methodology has remained constant. And in order to maintain updated information at a biologically significant and logistically implementable schedule, CPW conducts our SAM mapping sessions in one region of the state every year. And so we rotate that around in a counterclockwise rotation. So last year, the Northwest region field staff underwent a review of their SAM maps and updated their maps. And now this year, it's the Southwest region's turn. So the whole Southwest quadrant of the state. And we did a lot of our mapping over this summer with our field staff. So during these SAM sessions, our GIS staff comes down. They work with our district wildlife managers and our area biologists and other local staff. We pull up the definitions of all the layers and we review those, and then we look at all the layers, how they're currently mapped, and we pull up a bunch of underlying data to see if we need to make revisions, and then we'll make revisions to those maps as necessary. So the maps are displayed. They're overlaid with air photos or other data, like, for instance, big game data. We will pull up our flight data, or if we have any GPS location data, we could pull those up, and those become reference layers for our field staff to interpret and help make modifications to those map layers. I think what's important for everybody to understand is there's decades of information that go in and are captured in these maps, from ground observations shared by, the public, from our research projects, from our field staff. We use survey data, caller data, flight data if we have it. We look at habitat, we look at vegetation changes, we look at fire, we look at development trends, and that's all summarized using professional knowledge by our field staff to help inform how we make these changes to the maps. And as I mentioned, the maps are publicly available, and we'll give you some resources to find those towards the end of the presentation. An applicable subset of our SAM maps that in that process that we go through are called our high priority habitats. The high priority habitat maps are those layers found within our species activity mapping that are sensitive wildlife habitats for which we have sound spatial data and are scientifically backed recommendations to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts from development. And then, ECMC has adopted this high priority habitat concept into their regulations that are consultation triggers with CPW when you guys are going through oil and gas permitting. I think it's important to note that we don't map differently based on whether ECMC incorporates high priority habitat maps into their regulatory framework. We map based on the best available science with respect to how we think that those species are utilizing the landscape. And so it's that combo of empirical data that we collect or that our partners collect, combined with expert opinion to go in to make those maps. The origin of the high priority habitat concept came out of rulemaking under House Bill 1298 way back in 2008. But since that time, it's really informed how CPW engages in land use, with federal planning and with our counties. BLM and Forest Service utilize our high priority habitat maps as well. And since we're a recommending agency for most regulatory agencies, we don't have any regulatory land use authority. We conduct land use impact reviews based on whoever's requesting it, and we utilize this list of high priority habitats, and it ensures that we have consistent statewide best available science recommendations to regulators and decision makers. So again, these habitats are those that CPW has good geographic distribution of the species and the science to support the recommendations around what you should do about them in the face of development. Real quick on the data behind the maps. So because our mission is to perpetuate the wildlife species of the state, we collect a ton of data that that's for our management and conservation purposes. And so it's not just collected for the sole purpose of making maps. Maps is a product of a lot of the data that we collect. But we use data that we collect to answer numerous management questions, such as population trends, to understand habitat conditions, to delineate critical habitats, to inform animal distributions, to be responsive to federal listing proposals under the Endangered Species Act, and for species conservation planning. Our data layers inform professional judgment, and that professional judgment and the data behind them are what constitutes or what goes into making the maps. With respect to the big game, data sources such as flight data and collar data, those aren't defining the polygons, but rather they're used to help delineate those polygons in the shape and size. One important aspect of our SAM maps is that they reflect wildlife data while protecting, that sensitive, critical species location data. Our data collection for big game includes a long list of methods, but again, we use GPS collar data. We collect a lot of pre and post hunt data, including section age ratios for each DAU. We do that by helicopters and airplanes. Some ground classification methods are utilized depending on the species or the area that we're doing that. We collect harvest information from hunters. We estimate survival based on specific studies. And that includes all sources of mortality, including predation and wounding loss from hunting, at car accidents. That's why we find all that information. We also have a roadkill app that helps observational data with where we're finding roadkill and what species and where they are in which milepost. So, our methods for data collection are based on many decades of experience, and the methods and types of methods we used are verified through scientific literature, and the analysis is based upon scientific literature. Our data collection timeframes are important. So it's important to survey when, in the right season for, if you're looking at winter or breeding season. And those are generally standardized using the best available science over time. We're constantly striving to acquire and implement the best available data and methodology for data collection. So it's always new, and we're trying to stay on top of it. All the available data is reference data, again, for our understanding of wildlife management actions, which include making maps. So with that background and sort of the SAM process and how we go about making maps, here's some of the changes. And so, the purpose of today is to review some of the proposed changes that we're proposing for ECMC to adopt as high priority habitats. ECMC has to do a rulemaking to adopt that, and that's why we're here today, is kicking off that rulemaking process. So this map here is the 1202D habitats. This is a combination of all the habitats listed in 1202D, so it's busy. I get that. Just to kind of orient you a little bit, green is existing or no change. The black areas are proposed to be removed, and the red areas are additions. One thing to note is that individual layers may have a combination of additions and subtractions, and they may overlap with other species. So, you might have you might have winter concentration area for elk overlapping winter concentration for deer. But nevertheless, the polygons represent the HPH areas that would be a consultation trigger under ECMC regs. And then, as you can see, the bulk of the changes are in the Southwest region, and that's because we did SAM mapping in the Southwest region this year. There are some other changes across the state. Those are primarily based on LEC status. And so production area buffers for some of the grouse and prairie chicken species are based on the LEC status under 1202D. We don't have any proposed changes under 1202D for lesser prairie chicken focal areas or greater sage grouse priority habitat management area. But the other pluses and minuses are based on LEC status changes for this past year. So digging into the big game stuff a little bit more. So here's the 1202D layers. They're dominated by big game winter ranges, migration corridors. There's also the grouse production areas and prairie chicken production areas. But here's the general summary of this of statewide updates of percentages increase from the current rule. So in the last several years, CPW has invested considerable resources in analyzing our big game migration corridors and migration pinch points across the state. We discussed this a lot last year during rulemaking. And Michelle Corden, who is CPW's migration coordinator, actually gave a presentation to the commission back in February of 2024. And I don't know if we can put that link in the chat to that, but it's a good refresher. I watched it the other day. It's about 40 minutes, and it's Michelle just going through detail about how we used our data, GPS location data to help map migration corridors. But essentially, we aggregated all of our GPS color data across the state and conducted a Brownian bridge movement model. And that Brownian bridge movement model estimates the expected movement path and distance between two discrete points. It uses the time between locations, the distance between locations, and then the mobility or speed of movement to estimate where they think that animal might have gone. And this model produces a heat map and in concentration areas or hotspots. And those vary depending on the number of individual animals and where we have collars. But we used that base layer of Brownian bridge movement model and overlaid that with our SAM migration corridor, and were able to review those layers and make modifications based on professional judgment using sort of a hybrid approach of a modeled approach based on Brownian bridge movement modeling and expert opinion to get where we are with our migration corridors today. I will say there is some changes there for percentages, but we ended up actually slimming down in some areas quite a bit of that Brownian bridge movement model based on professional judgment. Okay, so here are the NSO habitats. So the 1202C habitats under commission rule. These are predominantly statewide aquatic habitats. So those sport fish management waters, native species conservation waters, cutthroat trout waters. This map that I'm showing here also includes the bighorn sheep production areas, the bat hibernacula, state wildlife areas, state parks, raptor nests, LEC sites. So it's all in one. I know it's real busy, but this slide on the left, I've got the raptor nests in the again, if the text is red, so we have decreasing, so less NSO based for those individual species because we have less nests on the ground or less active nests on the ground that we know about. And then green is existing or proposed no change, and then black is proposed to be removed. For aquatics, there were very, very few changes in the Southwest region. We moved from a statewide aquatics review to a regional review this year. And so last year had a full statewide aquatics review, and now we just did the Southwest this year. There were 5 changes. 3 of them are in the San Luis Valley. 2 of them are associated with Rio Grande cutthroat trout. restoration projects. And the other two are lakes that are managed outside of Montrose. One's a cutthroat trout broodstock lake, and the other is a quality sport fishery. So pretty minor changes on aquatics. Here are the Lex percentages of increase. So again, same map, but so you can't really tell where the Lex are, but essentially um, we had our grouse and our prairie chicken surveys, have indicated that we've got a few more Lex on the landscape. One thing that was pointed out to me is that here I have percentages listed, but we also have acreage values. So if you're a stakeholder and acreage values are important to you, let me know, and we can dig into your area of interest and get you that information on those acreage changes if it's something that you would want to know. Happy to share that. So here's our combined. So here's all of the HPH maps of all the listed habitats that ECMC regulates into one map. Again, green is existing or no change, red is additions, black is proposed to be removed. So this is the 1202D habitats and the 1202C habitats. Statewide, and all this busyness, it's about a 1.8% increase in consultation trigger area for HPH. Now I want to point you guys to just several locations where you can start exploring this data on your own as part of rulemaking and give us some feedback on this. Many of you probably are already aware, but ECMC posted the proposed 2025 changes on COGIS, I think at the beginning of this week. You can find those at the top of the wildlife tab. And then the subsequent years of approved maps are underneath those, so you can explore them on ECMC's website. We have them on our website, so you can navigate to the energy and land use page on CPW's website, and there you can download the data, the GIS data, or the KMZ files if you want to use them in Google Earth. And then finally, we heard from several stakeholders when we were in the past month when we've been doing some early stakeholder outreach that it would be nice to have an easy map viewer. And so our GIS folks created a side-by-side map viewer that if you had that link, if we could put that link in the chat, that would be awesome. This is all the same data through any of these portals. You're getting the same data, but if you can use this, and so the screen on the left, the split screen on the left is going to be the proposed changes, and then the one on the right is what's currently in rule. And so you can click on the different layers individually, or you can add them, and then you can zoom into your area and you can toggle that screen back and forth, and you can see very precisely the changes in whatever area of interest you had. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it back to Elias to talk about rulemaking timeline and process.
Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you for the presentation. Before everybody is the proposed high priority habitat rulemaking hearing schedule going into 2025. We do plan at this point to notice the rulemaking with the Secretary of State on December 30th, 2024. And I've outlined our tentative proposed deadlines for requests for party status, pre-hearing statements, responses, and testimony, all leading up to a hearing, which we are proposing to be heard on February 26th at 9 a.m. before the commission. Apologies for the typo. That is obviously February 26th, 2025. In addition, just to let everybody know, we are going to, following this stakeholder meeting, and post the recording and open up a portfolio for this rulemaking, as well as open up a stakeholder comment portal. Those will be posted right on the uh, news and notices tab on the front of the ECMC webpage for easy access, and then will be available under the hearings rulemaking tab later on as this progresses. And I believe that is really it for the proposed schedule. Obviously, when I say proposed, we are hoping that this schedule is what's going to stay in place moving forward. Obviously, there could be some slight changes, but this is what we will be pursuing at this point. And I believe that's it. So at this point, we would open it up to any questions that the stakeholders may have. You can feel free to enter those in the chat. You should also feel free to reach out to um, Brian or myself if you have questions about substance or procedure at any time moving forward. And of course, we will post a notice once this matter is noticed with the Secretary of State and docketed in the ECMC e-filing system. All right, any questions? Oh, I'm not seeing any questions. So at this point, I'm happy, Brian. I don't know if you want to stay on a bit longer and wait for some questions, or we can go ahead and conclude today's stakeholder meeting and update the front page of our webpage with some more information. And um, we thank everybody for their time.
Yeah, that's fine with me. I mean, the other thing I would say is, if you're a stakeholder and you have questions, feel free to reach out. And I might not be able to answer your question, but I bet I can find somebody that can. So, um, yeah, please reach out and we'll figure it out.
Great. Thank you again. And thanks everyone for attending. Happy holidays. And yes, ditto, please feel free to reach out with any further questions.